integration of Africa means three issues: prosperity, strategic security, and fraternity. The African leaders since independence need to be careful not to share the historical condemnation like the one we heap on the pre-colonial chiefs, who for almost 400 years, certainly in the case of the Great Lakes, concentrated on rivalries among themselves, even after Vasco da Gama had passed by the East African coast. Instead of uniting our people, they were busy fighting one another with their obsequious subjects, heaping pseudo-praises on them. For the last 55 years, I have been in the footsteps of Mwalimu Julius Nyerere on the issue of the East African Political Federation, the political integration of Kenya, Tanzania, and Uganda. The East African community has since expanded to include Rwanda, Burundi, and South Sudan. These people are specific groupings of the African peoples comprised of the Interlacustrian Bantus, the Bantus of the lakes, the Interlacustrian Nilotics, the Interlacustrian Nilo-Hamitic, and the Interlacustrian Cushitic. These groups have great similarities in dialects and also linkages among different clusters. Above all, they have the good fortune of having the detribalized dialect of Swahili.
President Museveni, currently in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia, for the 32nd African Union Summit, has today addressed a breakfast meeting as the African Union marked the 400th anniversary of the transatlantic slave trade. The president said that whereas African leaders of old made mistakes that led to the colonization of the continent and enabled slave trade to thrive, contemporary leaders must ensure these failings do not reoccur.
The problems of Africa are mainly endogenous within, from internal weaknesses, exploited by exogenous factors. Outsiders take advantage of our internal weaknesses. In Swahili and other Bantu dialects, there is the word kulala. Kulala means to sleep in Swahili, but also in some of the other Bantu dialects. I think in French they call it dormir. This new strong force comes on the scene. Why don't you wake up and see how to resist? Instead of fighting your neighbor, why don't you get together and you plan how to resist?
The meeting, which took place at the Sheraton Hotel in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia, was also attended by President Cyril Ramaphosa of South Africa, Felix Tshisekedi of DR Congo, Namibia's Hage Geingob, and hosted by Kenyan President Uhuru Kenyatta.
And for attending this event to commemorate the 400th anniversary of the transatlantic slave trade, and indeed to consider how to use this historic moment to begin a conversation on renewing the ties between Africa and its descendants in the Americas and worldwide.
President Cyril Ramaphosa said that slavery has been the ignition for apartheid in South Africa.
This is historic in the sense that it's a commemoration of the 400 years of slavery. And it's also a moment of reflection, to reflect on the human tragedy that befell our continent 400 years ago.
The commemoration is a recognition of the fact that never again should the African peoples permit themselves to be subjected to such dehumanizing conditions, sold into slavery, and have their freedoms curtailed in order to build up forcibly countries other than their own.
60% of slaves in Mauritius were coming from Mozambique through Madagascar and Mascarenhas Islands. It means that we know that before everything, we Africans, we are the same people.
Fighting to free my country. So my Pan-African credentials are very clear. I'm a Pan-Africanist by action.
Relatedly, President Museveni yesterday joined the tens of African and other leaders at the opening ceremony of the 32nd AU Summit, whose highlight was the handover of the leadership by President Paul Kagame of Rwanda to Egyptian leader Abdel Fattah al-Sisi. President al-Sisi, who will chair the AU for the rest of 2019, will be deputized by Presidents Cyril Ramaphosa of South Africa, Felix Tshisekedi of DR Congo, and Mahamadou Issoufou of Niger. The AU leaders also have designated President Ramaphosa as the successor to al-Sisi in 2020. In his maiden speech, President al-Sisi challenged African leaders to resolve most of their own challenges since they appreciate best the complexities involved, warning that external influence at times has only served to exacerbate the conflicts. UBC TV, Harriet Lambi.